I think the average bike rider is in kind of a weird place. I trust a lot of cycling journalists, and I don't really trust a lot of cycling media. The incentives are just misaligned, right? You've got affiliate stuff all over the place. You've got ad stuff all over the place. Here at Escape Collective, if you want honest, unbiased gear insights from experts who are not beholden to anybody but you, that's what we do here at Escape. Our member-funded model means we tell it like it is. The good, the bad, the revolutionary. To get access to in-depth reviews, long-term gear tests, head-to-head comparisons, join Escape Collective and trust what you read. escapecollective.com/join.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to this bonus episode of the Geek Warning podcast from the Escape Collective. I'm James Huang, and I hope you enjoyed our last members-only Ask a Wrench episode, what we published just a couple weeks ago. We're going to switch gears a bit again for this episode, and finally tackling a subject that I've actually been wanting to talk about for quite a long time, particularly as the parent of a 10-year-old that is very much in the middle of this journey, and that journey would be kid bikes. Specifically, we're talking about so-called kind of premium kid bikes, as in those nicer bikes that you get from brands that do nothing but kid bikes. And we're talking about brands like, like Provello, Woom, Trailcraft, Cleary, Early Riders, all the ones that you may have heard of. Looking at those, I'm sure a lot of people have thought to themselves, what exactly makes them different and why they cost more? And why does any of this stuff even matter? Why wouldn't you just get the cheapest thing you can find at some big box stores, since your kids are going to outgrow them super fast and trash them anyway? Well, to talk about all of this today, since I am certainly not an expert on the topic, I brought on the show a special guest, Jim Huth. He's the general manager at Provello. It's a dedicated kid bike brand based in Southern California. Jim, welcome to Geek Warning.
Hi. Yeah, great to be here. Thank you for having me.
Before we get too into the weeds, I do first want to point out that Jim is our only guest on the show today. But I just want to make sure that everyone understands that this is not a sponsored episode of any sort. And the only reason I've asked Jim here is just because I thought he'd be a good guest for the topic after a little conversation we had at Sea Otter. So just wanted to make sure we get that out of the way. I should also point out that since this is a members-only episode of Geek Warning, only Escape Collective members will have access to the full show. The rest of you, well, sorry, you're going to get cut off somewhere, probably somewhere good, and we're not really going to give you any notice when that happens. Escape Collective is a 100% member-funded publication, meaning there are no ads, no sketchy feeling affiliate links or anything like that. But that also means we're only able to do what we do with the financial backing of our audience. So if you do want this whole episode, along with the full access to all of our podcasts and all the written content we have up on the site, head over to escapecollective.com/member to sign up. We've got 2 tiers of membership and both monthly and annual options to fit your budget. So head on over there to sign up so you don't miss any more of what we're putting together over here. All right, Jim, if you wouldn't mind, before we really get into this whole thing, would you please mind telling our listeners who you are and what you do?
So I'm the general manager for Provello Bikes, but we're a very small company. So even though my title is general manager, when I came on board almost 5 years ago, I was hired as the first full-time employee at Provello Bikes. Provello only started in 2017. I started in 2019. I started as operations manager, meaning that I was just prepping and shipping bikes and helping customers, while Jacob, the owner, did pretty much everything else. And product development was really handled by another gentleman who has a really long history in the bike industry, started with Schwinn back when Schwinn was an American brand. When I started at Provello, the company moved from its headquarters in Westlake down to Temecula, and the person that was doing product development didn't really want to make that move. When I came on board, I was asked to make that move, so I made the move. And I just ended up starting to handle the product development stuff since I was in-house. And from there, my role just really started to shift more and more towards product. And that really happened because I'm a bike shop guy. I worked in bike shops for years and years and years. I started riding bikes when I was a kid. My first bike shop bike was actually the person that we bought it from at the bike shop. My mom ended up dating that guy. So I lived with the bike shop guy from being in elementary school all the way up. And then my first job was when I was 15 years old, was at that exact bike shop.
Oh, man.
And, things changed, obviously, like as my career progressed. But, you know, working in a bike shop, I think most mechanics in a bike shop don't want to do that for their whole life. It's fun. I really like it. I like wrenching on bikes, but I don't want to stand up all day anymore. And being on this side of it, I'm like excited every day I'm at work because I get to make awesome things and I have ideas in my head. And now I finally have the opportunity to just do whatever I want. And that experience at a bike shop, especially with kids bikes started to change in my time in bike shops. I remember I worked for a shop that sold a really big brand. And when those bikes transitioned from steel to aluminum, customers noticed. We noticed. It was just like, oh, this is a no-brainer. Like this bike is like $20 more. Buy this aluminum bike. So anyway, now I'm the general manager at Provello. I handle product development, and I absolutely love what I do.
Cool. That's awesome. A lot of that sounds very familiar. I mean, it's funny when you mentioned the whole like not wanting to stand up all day. I'm like, oh, that brings back memories. Let me tell you.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think
it gets rough as you get older.
Oh yeah. I think I worked in shops for like almost 14 years, something like that. Yeah, I was definitely a fair bit younger back then. And I definitely still remember getting home and just that feeling in your legs after being up on your feet and doing that all day. Like, I am in awe of people who do stuff like that still day in, day out. Before you ended up working at Provello, and after you were at the shop, was there anything in between? Like, had you worked anywhere else in the bike industry?
I mostly worked in shops. I did have a job at a big company called Sport Chalet, if you're familiar with it.
Oh, yeah. Yep.
So I went from a bike shop to Sport Chalet because the pay was better. And I ended up managing a Sport Chalet store. And then actually, while I was there, I was like, man, retail is terrible. And I went and started installing satellite dishes. I worked for Dish Network, which was also very terrible. I didn't last very long there. Found my way back to another bike shop. Every bike shop I've worked for, including Sport Chalet, has closed its doors. When the last shop that I worked at closed its doors, I was really lost, didn't know what to do. And I worked I got hired at VeloFix. I was the general manager at the time, and I think it still was their largest franchise in Los Angeles. A couple guys bought them. They had multiple vans throughout the LA area. And I was the general manager for that company. And actually, the first event I did for that company was also Jacob from Provello's first event, and I met him there.
Oh, no way. Cool.
Yeah. And that was really where we started talking and seeing him focus on direct to consumer while I was like, all these bike shops were closing. And now I found VeloFix that was a last mile for direct to consumer brands. I was really, a lot of people at bike shops have that mentality. They really don't like direct to consumer brands. And I had that mentality for a long time. I was like very anti direct to consumer because I felt like it was hurting our business. But when I was at VeloFix, I started, being a little bit more open-minded that the world is just changing and I had to figure out how to change with that. So now I work for a direct to consumer brand.
Cool. That's, I think it's a nice little bit of serendipity there that you ran into Jacob at one of those events. Well, I think it's pretty neat that you've ended up in the spot that you are in now. And I think certainly a lot of shop mechanics who might be listening to this at the moment would love to be in that position of taking all that hands-on experience and being able to apply that to actually making product. So I guess we can go ahead and start digging into talking about kid bikes in general. So I think the category of premium kid bikes, I feel like well, I shouldn't say I feel like it is a relatively recent phenomenon. And I'd say why a lot of people, certainly other enthusiast cyclists, like they get it. A lot of people, I think, are safe to say, are pretty confused still as to what these things even are. Like how exactly are they different from kid bikes that we've all been used to seeing over the years? And like, why do we even have brands now that do nothing aside from nice kid bikes?
High-end kids bikes, and I use the term high-end loosely, right? Because if you're, we're bike people, right? So when you compare these to adult bikes, our quote unquote high-end bike is the middle range is like a $500 bike. And in the adult bike world, at a bike shop, that's the first bike, right? It's the lowest end adult bike. So I think that it's really just a mentality of when you buy something for a kid because it's smaller, it should be less expensive. And as a parent, I get that.
Oh yeah.
Spend a lot of money on my kids, especially now that I just had a second one. And it's just like, oh my God, where am I supposed to get all this money from? So I do understand that. But that's also like that mentality is what's given us these high tensile steel, super heavy frames, no handbrakes. Like the bike is just as cheap as you can make it. And we just think that hinders kids from being able to ride. And if you see riders now, like kids are, I mean, in every sport, right? I don't know if it's just evolution or whatever's happening. Kids are getting better and better and better and better. And, I grew up riding BMX and I see the way BMX riders ride today versus what they did when I was a kid. Like a tail whip was a really big deal when I was a kid. And then we started doing bunny hop tail whips, and now people are doing quadruple tail whips, right? And it's like, if you were doing that on one of those heavy BMX bikes from the 80s, there's just no way, right? It took so much force to whip one of those things around. So having a kid's bike that does it's the same concept, right? It's just a lighter weight bike that fits better, that works better. And that's really all it's about. We're just trying to make a bike that is appropriate.
I guess I just want to toss in a little personal anecdote here. So my kid's a little older now. I mean, she's 10. When I look back at how she learned to ride a bike, I mean, pretty common for kids these days. She learned to ride on, I guess sort of the generic term Strider. She did learn on an actual Strider brand Strider. At least that's what she started out on. And I think what Strider has done for really kind of changing up the game in terms of kids learning how to ride bikes is definitely not to be discounted at all. Like it's been a big deal, just the idea of just not having pedals on something like that. But as a longtime bike shop person, as a longtime tech media person, it was pretty hard for me to ignore like the airless tires and like the cheap plastic bushing headset stuff like that. Like you could just tell it just wasn't like a super quality thing. And she was on that for a little bit, and then we switched her up to, I think she was on a Specialized something or other for a little bit, but the thing that really kind of changed the game for us was it was an offshoot of Cedric Gracia at the time. It was a company that was called Production Privé, and it was this super, super sweet balance bike, and like it was rad. But the thing that was really cool about it is it actually had a fitting on the rear for a disc brake, which it didn't come with it, so I had to go ahead and kind of figure out how to get that on there and whatever. Even for a kid that's little, it made a big difference as far as just being able to really control her speed. And then when she finally got on a pedal bike, at that point, I had already fully bought into the whole premium kid bike thing, and we ended up buying her a 14-inch Isla bike. So Isla Bike's a company that unfortunately isn't around anymore. But that whole experience really opened my eyes up to what these things are doing, because my kid was like 3.5 or 3, something like that. I had specifically requested from Isla Bike a bike that had no coaster brakes. So it was a freewheel, and it had handbrakes front and rear. And it was super light. It was remarkable how quickly she took to it. So at that point, like that was like the aha moment for me. So anyway, long personal anecdote. But one thing that was really striking for me was just, again, how much lighter that thing was. So as obsessive as adults often get about how much their bikes weigh, could you make the argument that it's even more important for a kid bike?
Yeah, I mean, definitely. I think it's more important for kids. When adults are building a road bike and they do, 100-mile rides on Saturday, they shave every gram they can, and that's because every gram helps them go a little bit further. But the difference is for kids, it's not that they're trying to go further. I mean, sure, they are trying to go further and enjoy riding their bike more, but kids are super light. When you have a 30, 40-pound kid on a little 14 or 16-inch wheeled bike, you can't have a 25-pound bike. It weighs over half of their weight. They can't pick it up. They can't get it up curbs. I mean, my son is still on a balance bike, but when we get to corners, he loves to pick his bike up and bring it up the curb. So having a super lightweight bike, it's really important. But, the issue is that to make lightweight bikes, most people assume that you have to spend a lot of money because, there's like the formula, right? For every 100 grams you save, you have to spend $1,000 or whatever it is. So doing that on a couple $100 aluminum bike is very challenging. And that's something that I work at every single day. And I think that that's really one of the things that made us start talking is I sit here and I get every single part I can from every single supplier that I can. And I put it on a scale. All right. And I have to weigh out the difference between the cost and the weight. And I have to look at that on every single component on the bike and then balance it out. I actually, when I go to, there's an event in Taiwan called Taichung Bike Week. That's where a lot of like us OEs go. So I think most people are familiar with the Taipei show, but that's really like kind of a consumer facing show. Taichung Bike Week's a little bit more intimate, and it's really where we try to build our OE spec and have kind of closed doors conversations with suppliers, and we do it all in one place. But every time I go to Taichung Bike Week, I could tell I must be one of the only people that does this, but I bring a scale with me. It's in my backpack. And every single time I put it on the table, every single supplier is shocked. And they just like look at me like, what is this person doing? Like, this guy is crazy. But it's like, I have to. It's super, super important to us. And I have suppliers sometimes make fun of me in our meetings because they're like, yeah, we get it. You care about weight. I'm like, dude, I have to. I'm sorry. Like, you have to shave every single gram. Like, every area where you can cut off, you have to cut it off. Weight is super important for little riders.
Yeah, I mean, I guess as a percentage, like if you look at a full powered e-mountain bike, for example, I mean, those things are almost 25 kilos sometimes, 25, or, 50, 55 pounds, something like that. And, now looking at the ecosystem of products that surround that whole segment, you've got hitch racks with ramps on them and stuff. Like, you have all these things to assist people in just handling them because they're so much heavier. And then if you look at the average weight of, let's just say 150, 170 pounds, something like that, 70, 80 kilos, whatever. It's a pretty big percentage of an adult body weight, and people talk about how heavy it is. And like you said, if you have a kid who's like 30, 40 pounds, and you got a bike that's like 30 pounds, I mean, all of a sudden it's like, we're not talking about an e-mountain bike that we're trying to lift up off the ground. All of a sudden we're talking about like, I don't know, like a small displacement moto. Like, it's a big bike. So I guess what really started this whole conversation, we met at Sea Otter, and you said you had this big spreadsheet. How into the weeds are you getting as far as trimming weight?
I mean, I weigh every single component. And when I say every single component, like, I have to weigh components of components, right? So when I weigh hubs, I also take it apart and I weigh the free hub body and I weigh the axle. With headsets, I have to weigh the top cap, the bearings, the races, every single component individually. And that's because at an OE level, when I choose a hub, I can choose to make axles steel or aluminum. We have to look at the difference between a quick release, a bolt-on quick release, or just threading the inside of the axle and using Allen bolts, because all of those things are options, and it gets lighter as you go down, but also you have to weigh that against price and usability. And I think a lot of the times on kids' bikes, you see a lot of companies sacrifice usability, and that's one thing that I absolutely cannot do. One of the places on a kid's bike where you can save weight is with cassettes, and I have one of our big suppliers is Microshift, and I have every single Microshift cassette in a bin right on the other side of my computer monitor here, and I weighed every single one of them. And when you look at it, I don't just weigh like the 7, the 8 speed, the 9 speed. I weigh the 1132, the 1134, and sit here and try to figure out the weight. And again, that's an area where a lot of companies, even some of the big kids bike companies, if you look at their drivetrain, like they'll have a 7 speed with an 1128. And that's a really easy way to save weight off of a kid's bike because those cogs are steel. And I'm pushing Microshift every single time I talk to them. I'm like, can you guys just please make a full aluminum cassette? Because it has a lightweight rider on it. And I feel like there's a chance that it could work. I need their assistance in testing that. I hope Microshift is listening. We talk about it all the time. And we use the aluminum spider cassettes on the more expensive bikes where they have the ability. But on the lower cost bikes, those steel cassettes weigh a ton. But when we make a bike, kids need gear range, just like we do. Right. And Microshift made that really awesome, super short derailleur with an 1138 cassette. And no, it's not the lightest cassette out there, but it is the lightest cassette that offers the most usability. So yeah, to answer your question, we basically weigh every single component, right? But when I do these weights on the same end of the spreadsheet, I have to sit here and think about, even though this thing is super light, is the bike going to be good if I use this? Is the kid going to be able to ride it? Are they going to be able to climb it? Are they going to be able to keep up with mom and dad or their siblings or whatever they might be doing? So yeah, we go super in depth with every single part of every single part.
See, this is why during that quick meeting that we had at Seattle, I knew that we'd get along. I love this. So how light are we talking here? And again, like just to reiterate, this isn't a sponsored post or anything. So, but I am still going to use this as an example. Like how light are we talking about here for a complete bike? Like what do your bikes typically come in at?
I mean, so the big bike that I've been focusing on weight for right now is our Zulu series, which we just launched. I got to be honest, I didn't have target weights, right? I just made the bike as light as I could, and I tried to stay within a reasonable price point, like I always do. I ruined our budget, right? Because we also we have a target, but the owner, he sits right next to me. He's over the wall. We just yell at each other. But I'm like, hey, I have to make a choice here. I'm like, this would make the bike way better, and we just do it. He's 100% invested in the company. He owns the company. We have no investors, and because of that, we can ruin our budget. And I really like that and appreciate it. Anyway, I don't have target weights for everything, but right now our 20-inch hardtail, and we actually don't have a production bike here yet. We only had a sample bike, and I did make some tweaks to that bike, so it should be lighter for the production version. But hardtail without pedals, because that's the way that we weigh bikes in the bike industry, even though I don't fully agree with it with kids' bikes, but that's the way everybody weighs it. 20-inch hardtail is 20.5 pounds. That's the weight of the sample bike. That's with a suspension fork. That's with through axles. That's with inner tubes in it. You can set it up tubeless to make it a little bit lighter. I did weigh that. The weight's, I think it's about 200 grams that you'll save if you set it up tubeless. So you get basically another half pound on it. So that bike set up tubeless without pedals for production spec should be less than 20 pounds, which for a $1,200 bike is super light. And I did that by just looking at everything. That rear hub is aluminum free hub, right? Aluminum axle. The rims are super light. The same company that makes our rims makes rims for some very, very large companies, and they make really great rims. Kenda makes our tires. We chose one of the lightest tires that you can get in the kids bike space. They also, make tubeless tires. So all these little things together just help to make the bike super, super light. I don't know how far you want me to go into detail about all those little lightweight components, but the spacers are plastic, right? Just because you can save 2 grams of spacer if you make it plastic.
So obviously there are a lot of places where you can save little bits here and there, but I'm wondering, as far as saving weight goes, certainly on adult bikes, you do get to a point where you start making compromises in functionality. Is it safe to assume that you have a little bit more wiggle room in that sense, just because you are dealing with riders that are so much lighter than adults? Are there testing standards for kid bikes?
There are testing standards for kids bikes. We don't follow them. We actually test to adult bike standards, especially in our mountain bikes. All of our mountain bikes are ISO MTB rated, which is the same standard that adult bikes are rated to. I don't know if other kids brands do that. We have never had a frame failure. And really, I think that we could test to a much lower standard, but we don't. We want to make sure that the bikes can hold up because, like I mentioned earlier, there are kids that just absolutely send it now. And we just had some of these kids here, and they were just at the Cams Inc. Invitational, and they were on Pink Bike. One of them was doing more backflips than anybody else there, and they have this huge picture of this 9-year-old kid, and I know that he was riding a full suspension bike from another kids bike brand. And he's tried a couple different ones, and one of them broke within the first 2 days of him riding it, right? I don't know what test standard that bike was made to. It was an expensive bike. It's not made by a cheap company. I wouldn't have expected it to do that. But I think that most kids would not have broken that bike. But that kid did, and we have to make sure that that kid can ride our bike. It's important. It has to hold up to everyone. I also like to ride the bikes around the shop.
Naturally. It's quicker that way.
Yeah, I have to make sure that I don't break anything. But yeah, so anyway, we test to an adult bike standard. There are kids bike standards, and I don't know what most brands do, but we test to an adult bike standard.
Cool. That's good to hear. I guess sticking to the component theme for a little while, you mentioned that 20-inch Zulu that you just finished up, it has suspension on it, front suspension. I wonder if that's kind of a little bit of a contentious topic. Like, do kids need suspension, especially when they're that little?
So we get this question all the time. I think right now, and we have been for a long time, we're the only ones that make a 16-inch bike with a suspension fork on it. And for a long time, we had the exclusive on that fork. I know that there's another company now using it, not on a regular bike, but on an electric version. And every time I get this question, I just tell customers really the same thing. It's what I believe. No, I don't think that most kids need that fork. I think a lot of people that buy it because it's cool. And I agree. I think it's really cool. But it does add weight and it doesn't help every rider. There are a few selective kids out there. We sponsored this kid. His name's Elliot Honeycutt. You might have seen him on the internet because he has like 1 million followers now. His videos have been everywhere. But he was just doing downhill races at Fontana, and he needs the fork. Right? You can see him tackling stuff that most adult bikes or most adult riders won't do, and you can see the fork working. So yeah, I think that even for some riders that the fork is needed. For most riders, I think that they really start to benefit from it at the 24-inch size. 20 and 16 is just the kids that are really starting to learn how to ride and really putting in miles and technical trails at a young age.
And just to come back to the whole weight thing that we were talking about just a second ago. So one thing I did notice on the suspension forks that you are putting on your bikes, which I thought was pretty surprising actually in a good way. At those price points, and this is something I'm going to touch on a little bit later. At that price point for adult bikes, you usually used to seeing suspension forks with you still have an aluminum crown, fine, but it's like steel stanchions, oftentimes even a steel steer tube. And if I remember correctly, you're using all aluminum upper assemblies, right?
Correct. Yeah. Aluminum steer tube, aluminum crown, aluminum uppers. It's all aluminum. We did just get off of a fork that was steel. It was like a 400 gram difference between those forks. It was enormous. That was where a big part of the weight savings on the new bike came from. The all aluminum fork is expensive, right? It's a big reason why our new bikes are more expensive than the older ones. But yeah, I mean, the big fork companies, I've looked at the OE cost of their forks compared to the OE cost of the fork that we are running, and it is it's different. Right? I don't know why it's so different. Those brands don't make forks for kids' bikes, so I don't really have a lot of conversations with those suppliers as to why there's those big price gaps. But even in the kids market, there are big fork brands like Manitou, right, that are making high-end forks for kids that are aluminum and they're lightweight, but they are also super expensive. And, we're using the new RST fork. The fork on the 20-inch is brand new. The one that was on the bike at Sea Otter was one of the first samples that they made. That fork is super light, but even more important than how light it is, it works really, really well.
That's the thing that I noticed the most when I was there. And I think I mentioned this to you too. It was like, definitely no pun intended. It was shockingly supple. Like it just, the degree to which it was just so easy to move just by hand, just squishing it between my thumb and forefingers and whatever. It was amazing how easily that thing moved. Well, cool. All right. Well, that seems like a pretty understandable argument for suspension. And I guess if you are going to put one on there, the fact that you put one on there that's pretty light is certainly good to hear. What about disc brakes? So do kids need disc brakes?
Yeah, I think that every kid really should have disc brakes, and I would like to put disc brakes on every single bike at some point. There's some concerns about it, and I have a lot of stuff in the works. Some I know that we're on video here, and we can see there's a 3D printer behind me. There's some kind of weird parts in there as to what I want to do with disc brakes, but it's not about the power, right? It's about the modulation, how easy they are to pull. For my son, he's about to turn 3. He's on his balance bike. He's able to pull his brake now. He can reach the brake lever. They're easy to reach. But, he's got to put 4 fingers on that thing. And it's a short cable. There's a lot of friction in linear pull brakes just from the cable and the housing. There's friction. So getting rid of all of that and having basically no effort to pull a brake, I think is very important for kids, especially since we're getting rid of coaster brakes. We're trying to get rid of coaster brakes on everything. God. Yeah, and then for those small bikes, I think there is a valid argument that a lot of brakes are difficult for kids to pull, and their legs are strong enough to push a coaster brake. So having a disc brake that they can use on a 14-inch wheel where they can pull the brake, I think that it's very beneficial.
Is that actually happening? I know there was a bunch of talk, at least certainly in the US, we've got kind of funky regulations as far as coaster brakes and kid bikes and stuff. And I know there was a lot of talk about doing away with that rule. Did that actually happen?
It has not happened. WOOM is actually is leading a petition on that against the CPSC. They used a video that Seth from Seth Bike Hacks he made about coaster brakes. That video is actually they're using it as legal evidence, right? Because he had such a valid argument. And in that video, he consulted with Jacob because Jacob, the owner of Pravella Bikes, is actually a lawyer by education. So he really understands that part of it. And basically everybody wants that rule to go away. But the problem is I'm sitting here talking about disc brakes, right? We're talking about disc brakes, hydraulic disc brakes, not mechanical, right? Just to clarify. And those brakes are expensive. And even though we can put them on at our price point, that law is protecting the masses, right? So it's a mass market problem, and you're not going to go into a department store and see a kid's bike with hydraulic disc brakes. If you put hand brakes on a bike from a department store, you're probably going to have those really kind of cheap caliper brakes that don't work, and those are not going to stop a kid. They're not going to stop anybody, right? So those bikes probably need coaster brakes. So there has to be something in the law that clarifies that. I don't know how to do that. I don't write law. I really wish that it was all just away and gone, and we had a little bit more control, but I understand why the law is there. So right now, we make a 14-inch disc brake bike that comes with a coaster brake, and then for $20, you can check a box on our website, and we will give you a complete rear wheel with a tire, brake rotor, and freewheel installed, and a hydraulic brake. So it's $20, right? We lose money on that, a lot of money. The brake costs more than that. So we give that to the customer, but the customer has to put it on themselves. I'm not allowed to. So, there's ways around it to stay compliant, but it's just not ideal.
Hey, I'm sorry, I did say that we were going to cut you off, did I not? So yeah, sorry, that turkey timer has just popped, which means that your free ride's over. If you want the rest of the show, as I mentioned earlier, just head over to escapecollective.com/member to sign up. It just takes a few minutes, and you'll be back here in no time. So head on over, and we'll see you back in a bit.